They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when your own family tries to drown you in it? What happens when the people who raised you, who taught you the value of hard work and saving for your future, suddenly demand that you sacrifice everything you've built? I'm Margaret Sullivan, and at 68 years old, I thought I'd finally earned the right to enjoy the life I'd worked so hard to create. I was wrong. My family had other plans for my money, and when I said no, they took me to court for $450,000. Hello, my friends. Thank you for being here with me today. My story is filled with truth, betrayal, love, and the painful lessons that come when family becomes your greatest obstacle. Each story I share reveals what really happens behind closed doors, the things we don't talk about at dinner tables, the decisions that tear families apart. Before I begin, I want to know, where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, if this story touches your heart or changes how you see family obligation, please consider subscribing to Grandma True Stories. It helps more people become aware of the reality of family pressure and elder financial strain. Now, let me tell you what really happened. I was born in 1956, the second of two daughters. My father, Robert Sullivan, was an accountant, a man who believed in numbers, order, and responsibility. My mother, Patricia, was a homemaker who believed in family above all else. They loved us both. I never doubted that, but love, I would learn, doesn't always translate into fairness. My sister Jennifer was 4 years older than me, and from the very beginning, she was different. She was beautiful, charming, impulsive. Where I was careful, she was carefree. Where I saved my allowance, she spent it immediately. My parents didn't see this as a problem to correct. They saw it as something to accommodate. Jennifer's just more spontaneous, my mother would say with a smile. Margaret's more serious. Everyone's different. But the accommodations didn't stop with allowance money. When Jennifer was 16, she wanted a car. Not just any car, a convertible Mustang. Our parents bought it for her. When I asked why I couldn't have one too, my father explained that Jennifer had a longer commute to school. The logic didn't quite add up, but I learned not to argue. I learned that fairness in my family wasn't about equal treatment. It was about equal need, as defined by whatever my parents decided at any given moment. I put myself through college on a combination of scholarships, student loans, and part-time work. Jennifer went to an expensive private university and dropped out after 2 years because the professors didn't understand her vision. My parents paid for all of it. I became a teacher. Steady income, good benefits, a pension. I lived below my means, invested wisely, and by the time I turned 40, I had built a modest nest egg of about $200,000. Jennifer, meanwhile, had been through 3 marriages, 5 business ventures that never quite got off the ground, and had accumulated more debt than I could fathom. "Maggie, you're so smart with money," she'd say whenever we talked. "You have to help me understand how you do it." But when I tried to help, suggesting budgets, explaining compound interest, recommending financial advisors, she'd laugh and change the subject. It wasn't that she wanted advice. It was that she wanted rescue, and she had always been rescued. Over the years, there were loans that turned into gifts. There were emergency checks written at holidays and unexpected moments. There were conversations with my parents where I had to explain why I couldn't just bail Jennifer out again, only to find that my parents had done it anyway, and then felt hurt that I hadn't been more grateful for their generosity. "We're family," my mother would say. "Family takes care of each other." I agreed with her, but I also knew something else, something I never quite said out loud. Family also takes advantage of each other. And my family had learned exactly how much they could ask of me. By the time I turned 55, I had $350,000 saved. I wasn't wealthy, not by any means, but I was secure. I could retire at 65 with modest but steady income. I could travel a little. I could help people I cared about without destroying my own future. It should have been enough. It wasn't. My parents were aging. My father had mild heart problems, and my mother was developing arthritis. Jennifer, now in her early 60s, had just gone through divorce number 3, and her house was in foreclosure. She had 2 adult children who rarely spoke to her, and a job as an office manager that paid barely enough to cover her rent. And then, one Sunday in October 2022, my parents did something I never saw coming. They bought Jennifer a house. Not a modest starter home. A 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in a decent neighborhood with a $280,000 mortgage. They put $50,000 down, money they'd saved over decades, and financed the rest. I found out about it at a family dinner my mother had organized at their home. The 5 of us sat around the dining room table, my parents, Jennifer, her son Michaels, who had come for the occasion, and me. We were eating pot roast and mashed potatoes, the same meal my mother had made every Sunday for 40 years. "We have wonderful news," my father announced, setting down his fork. "We've made a decision that we think will really help this family. We've purchased a house for Jennifer." I remember the exact moment, the way the candlelight flickered across the table, the way my mother smiled, the way Jennifer reached over and squeezed our father's hand. That's wonderful," I heard myself say, though something in my chest had already begun to tighten. "What a generous gift." My father cleared his throat. This was the part where he would explain the details, the terms, the way they'd planned to help their struggling daughter. I was proud of my parents for doing this. It was generous, yes, maybe more generous than was wise. But I understood the impulse. Jennifer had suffered through 3 divorces. She deserved a fresh start. "The thing is," my father continued, "Jennifer's credit isn't good enough to qualify for the mortgage on her own. The bank needs a co-signer." I set down my fork. "We were hoping," my mother said gently, "that you would be willing to help. Just as a co-signer. Just to help Jennifer get into the house." I didn't respond immediately. I cut a small piece of pot roast and put it in my mouth, though I couldn't taste it. "It's just a formality," Jennifer said quickly. "I'll make all the payments. It's my house. You'd just be, helping me qualify." "Margaret," my father said, and his tone had shifted. It was the tone he used when he was about to explain something important, something about responsibility and family. "You've done very well for yourself. You've saved enough to be comfortable. It's time you started thinking about what family really means." That's when my mother reached across the table and slid a folder toward me. Inside were mortgage papers, pre-approved and ready for my signature. "We've already spoken to the bank," she said. "You just need to sign here, here, and here. It's really very simple." I looked at the papers. I looked at my parents' faces, so hopeful, so convinced that this was not just reasonable, but something I should want to do. I looked at Jennifer, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been building for decades, through all the loans and gifts and accommodations, suddenly crystallized into absolute clarity. "No," I said quietly. The table went silent. "No," my mother repeated, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "No," I said again more firmly. I slid the papers back across the table. "I can't do this. I'm not going to do this, Margaret," my father began, his voice taking on a harder edge. "You're not thinking clearly about this." "I'm thinking very clearly," I said. "I'm thinking about my future. I'm thinking about my retirement, which is just 7 years away. I'm thinking about the fact that I've spent my entire life being responsible, being careful, saving for my future, and I'm not going to risk that by co-signing a mortgage I can't afford to pay if Jennifer can't." "She will pay," my mother said firmly. "We're not asking you to pay. We're just asking you to be a co-signer, which means," I said, "that if she doesn't pay, I'm legally responsible for $280,000. Do you understand what that means? That means if Jennifer loses her job, if she can't make the payments, if anything happens, that debt becomes my debt. It goes on my credit. It affects my ability to refinance my own home, to take out loans, to secure my future." "You won't have to worry about that," Jennifer said softly. "I promise, Maggie. I'll make the payments." I looked at my sister, and I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But I'd heard promises from Jennifer before. I'd watched her make promises to her ex-husbands, to her children, to our parents. And I'd watched those promises dissolve like sugar in water. "I'm sorry," I said, standing up. "I can't do this. And I think you shouldn't either," I added, looking at my parents. "I think you should reconsider this whole thing. Sit down," my father said sharply. I sat back down. "Your mother and I have discussed this at length," he continued. "We're not asking for your permission, we're asking for your help. There's a difference. And frankly, I'm disappointed that you're not being more generous with your sister." "Generous with my sister," I repeated, my voice shaking now. "Dad, I've been generous with Jennifer my entire life. I've given her thousands of dollars. Those were gifts given freely," my mother interjected. "We're not talking about those. We're talking about this one thing. One thing we're asking you to do to help this family." "It's not one thing," I said. "It's another thing on top of all the other things. It's another way that I'm expected to take care of Jennifer while she continues to make choices that don't work out." "That's not fair," Jennifer said, tears in her eyes now. "That's not fair, Maggie. I'm really trying, and maybe she was. Maybe Jennifer was genuinely trying to turn her life around. But good intentions don't pay mortgages. Good intentions don't keep you afloat when life gets difficult. I love you all, I said quietly. But I'm not signing those papers, I can't. The dinner ended shortly after that. My mother cleared the plates in silence. My father retreated to his study. Jennifer excused herself and went to the bathroom, and I heard her crying through the closed door. Michael, Jennifer's son, looked at me with an expression of such disappointment that I had to look away. I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't know it then, but that dinner, that moment at the table, that refusal, would set in motion a chain of events that would force my entire family to confront some very uncomfortable truths. And 6 months later, I would find myself sitting in a courtroom, listening to my own parents' attorney argue that I had a legal obligation to sacrifice my future for my sister's present. But that night, driving through the dark streets of my neighborhood, all I could feel was the weight of knowing that I had done the right thing, and the terrible price I would have to pay for it. The week after that dinner, my phone barely stopped ringing. First came my mother. She called on a Tuesday morning while I was at school, grading papers during my lunch break. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately. And again. By the third call, I turned off my phone. That evening there was an email. It was from my father, which was unusual. He rarely used email, preferring phone calls or, preferably, in-person conversations where he could maintain control of the narrative. Margaret, it began, your mother is very upset. She feels rejected and hurt by your refusal to help Jennifer. We raised you better than this. We taught you about family loyalty. I'm disappointed in you. Please reconsider. Dad, reconsider. As if I hadn't already spent hours turning this over in my mind, examining it from every angle, questioning whether I was being selfish or prudent. As if my decision was impulsive rather than carefully considered. I didn't respond to the email. On Friday, my best friend David came over for our weekly dinner. David and I had been close since college. We'd lived together briefly in our 20s, remained best friends through all the changes life brought, and had settled into the kind of friendship where we could be completely honest with each other. He was a retired attorney, and when I told him about the mortgage situation, his reaction was immediate and unambiguous. Absolutely not, he said firmly, setting down his wine glass. Maggie, do you understand what you'd be signing? You'd be jointly and severally liable for that entire debt. If Jennifer stops paying, and honestly, given her history, that's not unlikely, the bank can come after you for the entire amount. Not just your share, the entire $280,000. That's what I thought, I said. But my parents make it sound like I'm being unreasonable. Your parents, David said carefully, are emotionally invested in rescuing Jennifer. That doesn't make it your responsibility. And frankly, it's not even actually helpful to Jennifer. If she can't qualify for a mortgage on her own, maybe she shouldn't take on that level of debt. That's what I said, I replied. But my mother says I'm being cold-hearted. David shook his head. You know what? I'm going to say something that might be hard to hear. I think your family has spent your entire life treating you as the responsible one, the one who will always be there to pick up the pieces. And now that you're finally saying no, they're treating you like you're the problem. But you're not the problem. They're the problem for asking. I wanted to believe him. Some part of me did believe him. But another part of me, the part that had been conditioned since childhood to prioritize family harmony, to be the peacemaker, to not make waves, felt guilty for disagreeing with my parents. The calls continued throughout the following week. My mother left long voicemails, her voice alternating between pleading and hurt. We just thought you'd want to help, she said in one. We're getting older, Margaret. We won't be here forever. And when we're gone, all Jennifer will have is you. Don't you want to set her up so she can be okay? The implication was clear. If something happened to my parents and Jennifer wasn't secure, somehow that would be my fault. Somehow, my refusal to co-sign a mortgage was a failure of sisterly love. My father called once, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Your mother has been crying for 3 days, he said without preamble. She's devastated. She can't understand how her own daughter could be so unwilling to help her sister. Dad, I said quietly, I love Jennifer. But I can't. You can, he interrupted. You're choosing not to. There's a difference. He hung up before I could respond. Jennifer called me twice. The first time she was emotional, apologizing profusely for putting me in this position. swearing that she would make every payment on time, that she'd be good for the money. "I promise, Maggie," she said, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "I know I've let you down before, but this time is different. I'm different. Please, please don't let Mom and Dad down like this." The second time she called, a week later, her tone had shifted. She was angry. "Do you know what you're doing to this family?" she demanded. "Mom hasn't been sleeping. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. They're worried sick because you won't help. You're being incredibly selfish and frankly, I'm embarrassed to call you my sister." That one hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. For 2 months, the pressure continued. I stopped answering calls from my family. I checked my emails only to find them filled with messages from my mother, my father, sometimes from Jennifer, occasionally from my father's best friend, also named Robert, who apparently felt compelled to call me and lecture me about family values. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie in bed at night, replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I was wrong. Was I being selfish? Was I failing in some fundamental way as a daughter, as a sister? David came over one evening in December and found me sitting in my living room in the dark, not reading, not watching television, just sitting. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, turning on a lamp. 2 months, I said. 2 months of this. "David, I'm starting to think maybe they're right. Maybe I am being unreasonable." "Maggie, listen to me," he said, sitting down beside me. "What you're experiencing right now is called emotional manipulation. Your family is using guilt, obligation, and disappointment to pressure you into making a financial decision that isn't in your best interest. That's not love. That's coercion. But they're my family," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "I know," David said gently, "and that's what makes it so painful. But Maggie, you have to understand something. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to set boundaries. And setting a boundary, like refusing to co-sign a mortgage you can't afford, is not a failure of love. It's an act of self-preservation." I knew he was right. Some part of me had always known he was right. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally are two different things. 3 days before Christmas, my mother showed up at my house unannounced. I was in my kitchen, preparing vegetables for a solo dinner. I'd decided to skip the family Christmas celebration when I heard the knock on the door. I opened it to find my mother standing there in the cold, wearing only a thin coat, her face red and blotchy. "Mom," I said, shocked. "Come inside, you're freezing." She came inside, and we sat in my living room, and she cried. She cried about how much she loved Jennifer, how much she wanted Jennifer to have a good life, how unfair it was that Jennifer had been dealt so many difficult hands. And then, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, she said something that I think was supposed to be persuasive, but instead revealed the true nature of what was happening. "Your father and I," she said, "we won't be here forever, Margaret. When we're gone, we won't be able to help Jennifer anymore. We just want to know that she's taken care of, that her future is secure. Please, please just sign the papers. It's the last thing we're going to ask of you." It was such a perfect encapsulation of the problem. The way my parents had decided that Jennifer's security was their responsibility to ensure, and by extension mine. The way they'd assigned me the role of backup safety net, without ever asking if I wanted that role. The way they were trying to leverage my love for them, my fear of losing them, into compliance. I took my mother's hand. "Mom," I said, "I love you so much. But I can't do this. Not because I don't love Jennifer, but because I love myself, and I love my own future. And I deserve to protect that." My mother pulled her hand away. "That's a very selfish perspective," she said, and those words, those exact words, would echo in my head for months to come. After she left, I sat in my living room for a long time. I thought about all the ways I'd been molded into the role of responsible daughter, of reliable sister, of the one who would always be there to clean up the mess. I thought about how that role had felt like love, but how it had also felt like a prison. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to change my mind. And I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life apologizing for that decision, no matter how much pressure my family applied. I was wrong about one thing, though. I thought the pressure would ease after Christmas. I thought my family would eventually accept my decision and move on. I had no idea what was actually coming. In January, 2 months after that dinner, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, and it took me several minutes to understand what I was reading. My parents and Jennifer were suing me. The lawsuit claimed that I had a moral and legal obligation, as a family member, to co-sign the mortgage. It claimed that my refusal constituted breach of family duty and willful infliction of emotional distress, and it was asking for $450,000 in damages. I read the letter 3 times, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. Then I called David. They did what? He said when I told him. They're suing me, I repeated. My parents, my sister. They're actually suing me for $450,000. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Okay, David said finally. Okay, don't panic. This is actually a blessing in disguise, though you won't see it that way right now. How is this a blessing? I demanded. David, my family is suing me. Because, he said carefully, what they've done here is moved this from an emotional dispute into the legal realm, and in the legal realm, they have no case. None. What they're trying to do is force you to sign a mortgage through litigation, and I'm going to tell you right now, no court in this country is going to compel you to take on $280,000 in debt against your will. This lawsuit is going to fail, spectacularly, but they're still suing me, I said, and I started to cry. They're my family and they're suing me. I know, David said quietly. I know. But Maggie, sometimes families have to go to court to figure out what's real and what isn't. Sometimes that's what it takes. I didn't believe him then. I was too devastated, too hurt, too shocked by the fact that my own parents had decided that legal action was preferable to accepting my decision. But David was right about one thing. What was coming next would force my entire family, and the judge assigned to my case, to confront some very uncomfortable truths. And in doing so, it would reveal something I never could have anticipated. The courthouse was a gray, imposing building on the corner of 5th and Main. I'd driven past it 100 times in my life, but never imagined I'd be walking through its doors as a defendant in a lawsuit brought by my own family. David met me in the lobby at 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March. He was dressed in a sharp suit carrying a leather briefcase and looking far more confident than I felt. I, on the other hand, looked like what I was, a terrified 68-year-old woman who couldn't believe this was actually happening. How are you holding up? David asked, squeezing my shoulder. I haven't slept in 2 days. I admitted, David. What if we lose? What if the judge decides I owe them the money? We're not going to lose? He said firmly. Trust me, I've reviewed this case inside and out. There is no legal basis for what they're claiming. But I understand why you're nervous. The courtroom on the 3rd floor was smaller than I expected. There were no jury members. This was a civil case, so it would be decided by the judge alone. Judge Harold Morrison was a man in his early 70s, with gray hair, sharp eyes, and a face that suggested he'd seen enough of human nature to be mildly disappointed by most of it. My parents sat on the other side of the courtroom with their attorney, a slick man named Vincent Carlisle who looked like he'd stepped out of a television drama. Jennifer sat beside them, looking nervous and sad. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The proceedings began with Carlisle presenting the plaintiff's case. He argued that I had a familial obligation to support my sister, that my refusal to sign the mortgage was a breach of that obligation, and that my parents, who had sacrificed their own retirement security to help Jennifer, deserved compensation for the emotional distress caused by my selfish and vindictive decision. He painted a picture of Jennifer as a struggling woman who'd had bad luck in life, a sympathetic figure worthy of help. He portrayed my parents as loving, selfless individuals who only wanted the best for both their daughters, and he portrayed me as cold, calculating, and willing to let my own sister suffer in order to protect my own wealth. When he said the word wealth, as if my hard-earned retirement savings made me some kind of robber baron, I had to resist the urge to stand up and object. David, when it came his turn, he was methodical and precise. He presented financial documents showing that I had carefully built my savings over 40 years of teaching. He showed my relatively modest lifestyle, my modest home, my modest retirement projections. He demonstrated that signing a $280,000 mortgage would indeed put my retirement at serious risk. And then he did something that I thought was brilliant. He asked my parents' attorney a very specific question. Mr. Carlisle, David said, can you point to any legal precedent, any case law, any statute, any established principle of law that would compel an adult child to assume debt on behalf of an adult sibling? Carlisle hesitated. The law recognizes. I'm asking for a specific precedent. David interrupted politely. A case, a statute. Anything, can you provide one? Carlisle couldn't, because there wasn't one. There is no law that compels you to sign loans for your family members. There is no legal principle that requires adult children to financially support adult siblings. What my parents and Jennifer were asking for didn't exist in the legal system. It was pure emotion, pure obligation, pure family pressure, dressed up in the language of law. But then came the moment that changed everything. Judge Morrison had been listening quietly, taking notes. When both sides had finished their presentations, he set down his pen and looked directly at my father. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, "I have a question for you." My father straightened in his seat. "Yes, Your Honor. According to the documents presented," Judge Morrison said, "you and your wife purchased this house and took on a $280,000 mortgage. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," my father said. "We did that because we wanted to help our daughter, and you financed this purchase with a down payment of $50,000, money that you had saved over your lifetime. Is that also correct?" "Yes," my father said. He seemed confused about where this was going. "So let me ask you this," Judge Morrison continued, leaning forward slightly. "If you had $50,000 to put down on a house for your daughter, why didn't you simply gift her the entire house? Why did you take on a mortgage at your age instead?" My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your Honor, we wanted to help, but we also wanted to be financially responsible. We couldn't afford to gift her the entire house, but you could afford to put yourself on a $280,000 mortgage," Judge Morrison said. "It wasn't a question. We felt it was reasonable at the time," my father said, his voice becoming quieter. "And when you couldn't qualify for this mortgage without a co-signer," Judge Morrison continued, "your first instinct was to ask your other daughter, your younger daughter, who you admit has been financially responsible her entire life, to take on joint liability for this debt. Is that correct?" "Well, we thought." "I'm asking if that's correct," Judge Morrison said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Yes," my father admitted quietly. "That's what we did." Judge Morrison turned to me. "Ms. Sullivan, have you ever asked your parents to co-sign a mortgage for you?" "No, Your Honor," I said. My voice was shaking, but I kept going. "I've never asked them for financial help of any kind as an adult." "And have you ever defaulted on a loan? Have you ever missed a mortgage payment?" "No, Your Honor." "Never?" Judge Morrison turned back to my father. "Mr. Sullivan, has your older daughter, Jennifer, defaulted on loans in the past?" There was a long silence. "Your Honor," my father said, "Jennifer has had some financial difficulties. Has she defaulted on loans?" Judge Morrison repeated. "Yes," my father admitted. "She has." The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Morrison removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up again, his expression was complicated. It contained sadness, frustration, and something that looked like pity. "Let me make sure I understand the situation," he said slowly. "You have two daughters. One has demonstrated financial responsibility her entire adult life. One has demonstrated repeated financial irresponsibility. You purchased a house for the financially irresponsible daughter, took on a mortgage you couldn't qualify for on your own, and when the bank required a co-signer, you asked the responsible daughter to assume joint liability for a debt she didn't incur, on behalf of a sister who has a documented history of defaulting on financial obligations. Is that an accurate summary?" "Your Honor, it's more complicated than that," my father began. "Is it?" Judge Morrison asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're asking this court to force Ms. Sullivan to take on financial risk, significant financial risk, to bail out a situation that you created, and you're asking me to do this despite the fact that Ms. Sullivan has done everything right and your other daughter has done everything wrong. Mr. Sullivan, do you see the problem with that request?" My father didn't answer. "The problem," Judge Morrison continued, not waiting for an answer, "is that there is no legal basis for it. There is no law that says an adult child must co-sign debt for a sibling. There is no law that says financial responsibility becomes a liability rather than an asset. And there is certainly no law that says the court should force someone to assume debt against their will, no matter how much emotional pressure their family applies." He paused, and in that pause, I saw something shift in the courtroom. My mother's face crumpled. Jennifer started to cry quietly. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "This court is going to rule in favor of the defendant," Judge Morrison said. "M. Sullivan, you are not liable for the mortgage on your sister's house. You are not liable for any damages claimed by the plaintiffs. And quite frankly, if I'm being honest, I'm troubled by the fact that this case was brought at all." He looked directly at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I understand that you love your daughter. I understand that you wanted to help her. But love doesn't override financial reality, and family obligation doesn't create legal obligation. You took a financial risk when you purchased that house. That risk is yours to bear, not your other daughter's, and attempting to transfer that risk through legal action is, in my opinion, a troubling abuse of the court system. He turned to Jennifer. Ems? Morrison, I sympathize with the difficulties you've faced in your life. But I want you to hear this clearly: your sister is not responsible for your financial security. Your parents are not responsible for your financial security. You are responsible for your financial security. And no court in this country is going to change that. Finally, he looked at me. Ems? Sullivan, I commend you for having the courage to say no. I commend you for protecting your own future. And I want you to know that this court recognizes that standing firm in the face of family pressure is one of the hardest things a person can do. He banged his gavel. Case dismissed. I don't remember much about the walk out of the courtroom. I remember David putting his arm around me. I remember my legs feeling unsteady. I remember someone, I think it was my mother, calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, David turned to me with a smile. You did it, he said. It's over. But it wasn't over. Not really. The lawsuit was over, but everything else was just beginning. Because I had won in court, but I had lost my family. And standing on those courthouse steps, understanding finally and completely that my parents had chosen to sue me rather than accept my no, well, that was a different kind of loss than any I'd experienced before. The news spread through my family like wildfire. Within hours, I started receiving texts and calls from aunts, uncles, and cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly very interested in my legal victory. Most of them weren't congratulating me. How could you do this to your parents? My Aunt Carol texted. They're devastated. Your mother can barely get out of bed. My Uncle Richard called and didn't even say hello. You've shamed this family, he said. You took your parents to court and humiliated them. I don't know how you're going to live with that. My cousins were divided. Some sided with my parents, seeing my refusal in the subsequent lawsuit as some kind of unforgivable betrayal. Others, I later learned, privately agreed with me, but were too afraid of social ostracism to say so publicly. I stopped answering my phone. David urged me to give it time. These things have a way of settling down, he assured me. Right now, everyone's emotional. Your parents are embarrassed about losing the lawsuit. They're looking for someone to blame. And they're blaming you. But eventually they'll come to terms with it. He was right that people's emotions would settle. He was wrong about what would come after. A week after the trial, I received an email from my father. No subject line, just, your mother and I have decided to remove you from our will. We will not be leaving you anything. We will not be attending any family events where you might be present, and we ask that you do not contact us. Your mother is in poor health, and your actions have caused her considerable stress. We cannot have you in our lives anymore. Dad, I read that email 6 times. Each time, it felt like being slapped. They were cutting me off. Completely. Not just emotionally, but formally, legally. They were removing me from their will. A will that, truthfully, I'd never expected much from anyway, but the symbolic gesture was devastating. They were declaring that I was no longer their daughter, that I had forfeited my place in this family through my act of financial self-preservation. I called David in tears. This is actually a positive thing, he said, which made me cry harder. How is this positive? I demanded. My parents have disowned me. They're hurt right now, David said gently. But listen, what they're doing actually protects you. By removing you from the will, they're also removing any claim on your estate. They're saying that the relationship is over, which means you don't owe them anything. Not financially, not emotionally. It's clean. It's final. And frankly, it might be what you need. I wasn't ready to hear that. I spent the next 3 weeks in a fog of grief and confusion. I called in sick to school. I sat in my house and didn't do much of anything. I replayed conversations from my childhood, looking for the moment when the expectation had been set that I would be responsible for Jennifer. That I would always be available, that my needs would come second. But I couldn't find one specific moment. It had been 1,000 small moments. 1,000 times I'd been praised for being the responsible one. 1,000 times I'd picked up after Jennifer and made excuses for her and helped her out of jams. I'd been trained, over decades, to see my sister's problems as somehow my responsibility. And when I finally refused to participate in that dynamic anymore, my entire family had treated it as a betrayal. David came over one evening and found me in the same clothes I'd been wearing for 3 days, sitting in my living room with the curtains drawn. Okay, he said firmly, opening the curtains. "This stops now. David, leave me alone," I said. "No," he replied. "I'm not going to leave you alone, because you're spiraling and you're not thinking clearly. So I'm going to tell you something that you need to hear, even though you're not going to want to hear it." He sat down across from me. "What your family did to you was emotional abuse. It was manipulation. It was using guilt and obligation and love as weapons to get you to do something that wasn't in your best interest. And when you refused, when you finally stood up for yourself, they escalated. They sued you, and when they lost, they disowned you. Do you understand what that pattern is?" I didn't answer. "That's not love, Maggie," he continued. "That's control, and your family is very, very good at it. But now that they've shown their hand, now that they've made it clear that their love is conditional on your compliance, you have an opportunity to break free from that dynamic completely." "I don't want to break free," I said quietly. "I want my family back." "I know," David said, and his voice was so kind that it made me cry again. "But Maggie, your family was never really yours to have. You were just the supporting character in their story. The responsible daughter who would always be there to clean up the mess. Well, you stopped cleaning up the mess. And look what happened. They sued you and disowned you. That's who they are. That's what they do. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start healing." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to defend my family, to explain that they were good people who just made a mistake, who were just desperate to help Jennifer. But the evidence was right there in front of me. My father's email, the lawsuit papers, years of conversations where my needs were minimized and Jennifer's were magnified. It took me another month to really accept what David was saying. A month of therapy with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics. A month of reading books about emotional manipulation and family systems. A month of slowly, painfully coming to terms with the fact that my family had never really seen me for who I was. They'd only seen me for what I could do for them. And then, something unexpected happened. Jennifer called me. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since the courtroom, and I had no idea what she could possibly want to say to me. But something made me pick up. "Hi," he said quietly. She sounded different, smaller somehow, less defensive. "Jennifer," I said. "How did you get this number?" "I still had it," she said. "From before." I wanted to apologize. I wasn't sure how to respond. An apology seemed both too little and too late. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Jennifer continued. "About the lawsuit. About the house. About everything. And I want you to know that I didn't want to do it. The lawsuit, I mean. I told Mom and Dad they shouldn't do it, but they wouldn't listen. They were so angry at you for saying no. They felt like you were rejecting them, like you thought you were better than us. And I just went along with it because I was afraid to stand up to them." "Okay," I said. I wasn't sure where this was going. "I lost the house, by the way," Jennifer said. "I tried to make the payments. I really did, but I lost my job about 6 months after we bought it. And I couldn't keep up. Mom and Dad had to go back into debt to bail me out. They're in really bad financial shape now, Maggie. Really bad. And I think that's why they were so angry at you. Because they were panicking about money, and they thought if they could get you to co-sign, it would somehow fix things." "Jennifer," I said, "that's not my problem to solve." "I know," she said quickly. "I know that. I'm not asking you to solve it. I'm trying to explain why they did what they did. They were scared. And when they got scared, they pushed. And when you pushed back, they escalated. But Maggie, I want you to know that I understand why you said no. I do. You were right. You were completely right. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it." I could hear tears in her voice. "What do you want from me, Jennifer?" I asked. I wasn't trying to be cold. I was just trying to understand. "I don't want anything," she said. "That's the thing. I'm not calling to ask for help or money or anything like that. I'm just calling to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I've been the kind of person who needs rescue. I'm sorry that I never learned to take care of myself. And I'm sorry that Mom and Dad are the kind of people who enabled that instead of helping me become independent. But mostly, I'm sorry that I participated in hurting you, and I understand if you don't forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I recognize it." After we hung up, I sat with that conversation for a long time. Jennifer's apology didn't fix anything. It didn't repair the damage or make the lawsuit go away or bring my parents back. But it did something else. It showed me that there was a possibility for consciousness within my family. That Jennifer, at least, had the capacity to reflect on her own behavior and take responsibility for it. My parents, I would later learn, never did. My father had a mild stroke 6 months after the lawsuit. My mother called me. The first time she'd contacted me since the email disowning me. She called because she needed to tell me that he was in the hospital, that the doctors weren't sure if he'd recover fully, that she was scared. And I went. Of course I went. That's who I am. That's who I've always been, the person who shows up, who takes care of things, who puts her own feelings aside to be present for family in crisis. But this time it was different. This time I went as a choice. Not because I felt obligated, but because some part of me still loved my father, even after everything. I sat with him in the hospital. I talked to the doctors. I helped my mother figure out his care and his medications and his physical therapy. And I did all of this without expecting anything in return. Not forgiveness, not gratitude, not acknowledgement that they had been wrong. My father recovered reasonably well from the stroke, though it left him weakened and somewhat forgetful. My mother, I think, felt guilty about what she'd done, about the lawsuit, about the disavowment email, but she never actually apologized. She just acted like the lawsuit had never happened. Like we could go back to the way things were before. I tried for a while, I called more often. I visited more frequently. I picked up some of my old patents. But David noticed. "You're slipping back?" he said gently one day when I told him I was planning to give my mother money to help with my father's medical bills. "I know," I said. "But David, they're struggling. My father just had a stroke. My mother's exhausted. I can't just abandon them." "You're not abandoning them," David said. "But Maggie, listen to yourself. You're already reverting to being the rescuer. You're already putting their needs above your own again. And your mother? She still hasn't apologized. She still hasn't acknowledged what she did. She's just waiting for you to come back into the fold so she can continue the same dynamic." He was right, and I knew it. But it was so hard to stay firm. So hard to keep that boundary in place when my parents needed me. So I made a compromise with myself. I would help them, but I would do it from a place of choice, not obligation. I would set limits. I would not sacrifice my own retirement or my own future. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than what had come before. A year after the lawsuit, I ran into Judge Morrison at a coffee shop. I almost didn't recognize him without his robes, but there was something about his bearing that was unmistakable. "M. Sullivan," he said, approaching my table. "Margaret Sullivan. How are you, Judge Morrison?" I said, standing up. I'm doing well, actually. I've thought about your case often," he said, sitting down across from me without asking. Not because it was legally complicated, it wasn't, but because it was so deeply human. "You were asking a very simple question, am I allowed to say no? And the answer is yes, you're always allowed to say no. But nobody had ever taught you that, had they?" "No," I admitted. "They hadn't. Well, I hope this experience, as painful as it was, taught you that," he said. "Because that's going to be important for the rest of your life. There are always going to be people who want something from you, who will tell you that it's your responsibility to give it to them, who will make you feel guilty when you don't. And every single time, you get to say no. That's not selfish, that's not betrayal. That's just basic self-preservation." We talked for nearly an hour. Judge Morrison told me about his own family, about conflicts he'd had with his own siblings, about the importance of protecting your future while also trying to maintain family relationships. And he told me something that I think changed how I understood my own story. "You know what struck me most about your case?" he said. "It wasn't that your family tried to manipulate you. Family does that all the time. What struck me was that when you said no, they escalated. They didn't accept your answer. They didn't respect your boundary. They sued you. And do you know what that tells me?" I shook my head. "It tells me that your family was never comfortable with you having power," he said. "As long as you were the responsible one. The one who always came through, the one who picked up after everyone else, they had all the power. They got to make demands. They got to manipulate. They got to assume that you'd always be there. But when you said no, when you took back your power, they panicked. And they tried to use the legal system to force you back into the powerless position you'd always occupied. They didn't succeed," I said. "No," Judge Morrison agreed. "It didn't. And that's the important part. You stood your ground. And now, whatever happens with your family, you know that you can. You know that you have that capacity. And that knowledge will serve you for the rest of your life." 2 years after the lawsuit, I retired. I had planned to retire at 65 and I did, right on schedule. The ceremony at school was bittersweet, 40 years of teaching, of shaping young minds, of being present in a way that mattered. But I was ready, I was tired, and I was eager to finally have time to figure out who Margaret Sullivan was when she wasn't being the responsible daughter, the reliable sister, the teacher who always stayed late to help struggling students. The answer, I discovered, was more complicated than I expected. For the first month of retirement, I felt lost. I'd structured my entire life around obligation. To my job, to my family, to the various people who needed me. Without that structure, I didn't quite know what to do with myself. I slept in, I took long walks. I read books that I'd been meaning to read for years. And I felt oddly guilty about all of it. David noticed. "You're not allowed to feel guilty about enjoying your life," he said firmly when I mentioned it. "I know," I said. "But I feel like I should be doing something. Something productive. Something that matters." "Your life matters," David replied. "Just by existing, just by taking care of yourself, just by being present in the world, that matters. You've spent your entire life being useful to other people. You're allowed to just be for a while." So I tried. I really did try to just be. But it was harder than I expected. Around month 2 of retirement, my mother had a health scare. Nothing serious. Just some chest pain that turned out to be anxiety, not a heart attack. But it was enough to send me back into caretaker mode. I started calling daily. I started visiting multiple times a week. I started researching doctors and health conditions and ways to help. And I could feel David's disapproval, even though he didn't say anything directly. One evening, he finally addressed it. "You're doing it again," he said gently. "You're making your parents your job." "They need me?" I said defensively. "Do they?" David asked. "Or have they just gotten very good at making you feel like they need you, so that you'll come back into the dynamic you've always occupied?" I wanted to argue with him. But the thing about close friendship is that sometimes the people closest to you can see things about you that you can't see yourself. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Just cut them off completely. Never call them, never help them when they're struggling?" "No," David said. "But I think you need to set some boundaries, real boundaries. Not the kind where you say you have boundaries, but then break them the minute your parents call. I mean actual, enforced boundaries." "What would that look like?" I asked. "I don't know," David said honestly. "But I think you need to figure it out. Because if you don't, you're going to spend your entire retirement being pulled back into the same patterns that hurt you so much." So I did something I'd never done before. I sat down and actually thought about what a healthy relationship with my family would look like. What boundaries would I need to set? What would I accept, and what would I refuse? The list I came up with surprised me. I will call my parents once a week. Not more. Once a week is enough. I will visit them twice a month. Not more. They are adults capable of taking care of themselves. I will not give them money. Ever. Not for emergencies, not for medical bills, not for anything. If they need financial help, they need to figure out how to get it without me. I will not make excuses for their behavior or pretend that the lawsuit didn't happen. I will not resume my old role as the family fixer. I will not sacrifice my retirement, my peace, or my future for their comfort. And if they cannot respect these boundaries, I will reduce contact further. Writing that list felt radical. It felt selfish. It felt wrong. But when I showed it to David, he nodded with approval. "Good," he said. "Now stick to it. Actually stick to it, Maggie. Not halfway, not with exceptions. Actually do this." My parents did not respond well to my boundaries. When I started calling only once a week instead of several times, my mother complained. "You don't care about us anymore," she said. "You used to call all the time." "I called all the time because I was trying to maintain a relationship that wasn't healthy," I said quietly. "I'm setting boundaries now. I call once a week. That's my boundary." "That's not very often," she said, hurt in her voice. "I know," I replied. "But it's what I can do." When I refused to give them money for my father's dental work, they were shocked. "After everything we've done for you?" my mother asked. "Mom," I said carefully, "you sued me, you disowned me. You've made it very clear that your love is conditional. So yes, after everything you've done to me, I'm going to take care of myself first." It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. It was honest. And my mother didn't like it. For several months, there was a lot of coldness. My mother would call me back immediately after I hung up, leaving voicemails about how hurt she was, how disappointed, how much I'd changed. My father would pick up the phone and sigh heavily, as if my very existence was a burden, and I let them feel what they felt. I didn't try to fix it or explain it or make them feel better. I just held my boundaries. Then something shifted. About 6 months into my retirement, Jennifer reached out again. She'd been in therapy, actual therapy, with a real therapist, and she wanted to talk about our family dynamics. We met for coffee, and for the first time in years, we had a real conversation. Not a surface-level catching up, but an actual discussion about our childhood, about the way we'd been raised, about the patterns that had developed. "I think Mom and Dad loved us," Jennifer said carefully, "but I also think they loved us in a way that was really damaging. They loved me by constantly bailing me out, which meant I never learned to stand on my own. And they loved you by constantly asking you to take care of me, which meant you never learned to prioritize yourself." "I know," I said. "I've been in therapy too, actually. Coming to terms with a lot of stuff." "I'm sorry, Maggie," Jennifer said, and I could tell she meant it. "I'm sorry for all the ways I leaned on you. I'm sorry for taking you for granted. And I'm sorry that I participated in the lawsuit." "I know," I said again. "And I'm working on forgiving you. But Jennifer, I want you to know that I'm not going to go back to being the person I was. I'm not going to rescue you anymore. I'm not going to enable your patterns. And if you're in crisis, I'll listen and I'll care. But I won't be responsible for fixing it." "I don't expect you to," Jennifer said. "That's part of why I'm in therapy, to learn how to fix my own stuff. And honestly, it's been really good for me. Losing that safety net made me finally take responsibility for my own life. And that was when I realized something important. In refusing to enable Jennifer, I had actually done her a favor. By saying no, by holding firm despite all the pressure and guilt and litigation, I had forced her to grow up in a way that my parents' constant rescue efforts never could have. I told David this when I saw him next. "See," he said with a satisfied smile, "sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no." My father died on a Tuesday in March, 2 years and 4 months after the lawsuit. He had another stroke, a bigger one this time, and his body just couldn't recover. He was in the hospital for 3 days, and I was there for all of it. I held his hand, I talked to the doctors, I sat with my mother while she cried, and when it was over, I grieved. I grieved the father I had, and I grieved the father I wished I'd had. I grieved the relationship we never quite managed to repair. At his funeral, I delivered a eulogy. I talked about his love of numbers and order. I talked about his dedication to his work. I talked about the way he'd taught me the importance of financial responsibility. And I didn't mention the lawsuit. I didn't mention the disownment. I didn't mention the ways he'd hurt me. But I also didn't pretend that those things hadn't happened. After the service, my mother approached me. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired, old, diminished by grief. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for everything, for the lawsuit, for the way I treated you, for making you feel like you had to choose between us and yourself. I was wrong. I wasn't sure what to do with that apology. It came too late to fix anything. It didn't change what had happened. But it was something. Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "I accept your apology, and I meant it. Not because it erased the past, but because accepting her apology meant I could finally move forward without carrying the weight of her refusal to acknowledge what she'd done." My mother lived for another 3 years after my father's death. During that time, our relationship changed. It was better, in some ways. She didn't try to manipulate me anymore. She respected my boundaries, not because she suddenly agreed with them, but because she was older now, more fragile, less able to enforce her will through guilt and pressure. We developed a new rhythm. I called her once a week. I visited twice a month. I helped her with practical things, paying bills, managing doctor's appointments, fixing things around her house. But I didn't give her money. I didn't sacrifice my own needs for her comfort. It wasn't the relationship I'd always wanted. But it was honest, and in many ways, that was better. When she died, at 87, I mourned her too. I mourned the mother I'd had, and I mourned the mother I'd hoped she'd become. Jennifer was at the funeral. She'd really turned her life around by then. She'd been sober for 3 years, was in a stable job, was rebuilding relationships with her own children. She was still broken in some ways, we all are, but she was trying. And she was no longer relying on me to fix her life. "I'm glad you're my sister," she said to me after the service. "I know that for a long time I made that hard, but I'm glad. I'm glad too," I told her, and I meant it. Now at 72, I've had some time to reflect on everything that happened. The lawsuit, the disownement, the years of struggle and therapy, and slowly rebuilding my sense of self. And if I'm being honest, I'm grateful for it. Not grateful that my family hurt me. Not grateful that I had to go to court, but grateful that I was forced to confront the dynamics that had been shaping my life. Grateful that I had to stand firm and say no, grateful that I discovered I was strong enough to withstand the fallout. Here's what I've learned: saying no to your family doesn't make you selfish. It makes you healthy. Setting boundaries isn't a failure of love. It's a requirement for love to be real, to be healthy, to be something that doesn't destroy you. I spent 68 years of my life being the responsible one, the one who would always be there to fix things, the one who prioritized other people's needs above her own. And it wasn't until I refused to do that anymore, until I said no to signing that mortgage, until I held firm despite the lawsuit, despite the disownment, despite all the guilt and manipulation, that I finally became free. My parents never understood that. My mother came close, in the end, but my father took his confusion and his hurt to his grave. But Jennifer understands, and David understands, and I understand, and that's enough. People often ask me what the turning point was. When did I know I was going to be okay? When did I stop questioning my decision to say no? When did I finally forgive myself for standing firm? The answer is always the same: it was in the courtroom, when Judge Morrison asked my father that one simple question. But it took me years to fully understand why. At the time, I thought the important moment was when the judge ruled in my favor. I thought that was the victory: winning the lawsuit, having the court validate my position, having a legal authority say that I was right and my family was wrong. But it wasn't really about winning. It was about the question itself. If you had $50,000 to put down on a house for your daughter, why didn't you simply gift her the entire house? Why did you take on a mortgage at your age instead? That question did something that no amount of therapy could have done. It held up a mirror to the entire dynamic, and it showed the truth so clearly that there was no way to deny it, no way to rationalize it, no way to hide from it anymore. My parents had made a choice. They chose to buy Jennifer a house, even though they couldn't afford to do so. They chose to take on debt they couldn't carry. They chose to involve me in that problem, even after I'd explicitly refused. And when I wouldn't participate, they chose to sue me rather than accept my answer. Judge Morrison's question exposed all of that. It showed that my parents' decision wasn't about what was best for Jennifer or what was best for the family. It was about what made my parents feel like they were doing enough, like they were being good enough, like they could fix what they perceived as broken in their troubled daughter. And they were willing to destroy their relationship with me to accomplish that. I realized during the trial that my parents had never really seen me, not the real me. They had seen the role I played, the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who would always be there. And when I tried to step out of that role, they didn't see a person setting a healthy boundary. They saw a threat to their identity as good parents, as a cohesive family, as people who took care of their own. My refusal to sign the mortgage wasn't just a financial decision. It was an existential threat to the family narrative they'd constructed. And that's what made them sue me. I didn't fully understand this until about 5 years after the trial, when I was reading a book about family systems and dysfunctional dynamics. There was a passage that stopped me cold. In unhealthy family systems, individual family members are assigned roles that serve the system, not the individual. One person becomes the rescuer. One becomes the rescued. One becomes the peacemaker. One becomes the rebel. These roles are maintained through a complex system of rewards and punishments. When someone tries to step out of their assigned role, the family system experiences this as a threat. The family will often escalate its efforts to push the person back into their role, using guilt, shame, manipulation, or in extreme cases rejection or litigation. I read that passage 6 times, and each time I felt more and more validated. That's exactly what had happened. I had been assigned the role of rescuer, the responsible one who would always be there. Jennifer had been assigned the role of the rescued, the one who needed help. My parents had been assigned the role of meaning enablers, trying to solve their daughter's problems while remaining blind to their own enabling behavior. And when I refused to stay in my assigned role, the system broke down. And the system, my family, did everything it could to push me back into that role. The lawsuit wasn't really about $450,000. It was about forcing me back into the role I'd always occupied. And I didn't fall for it. Judge Morrison's question was powerful because it did something that internal reflection couldn't do. It made the situation objective. It held the family dynamics up to the light of legal scrutiny and revealed them for what they were. A case of financially irresponsible parents trying to force a financially responsible daughter to bail them out. But there was another layer to that question, something that I didn't fully appreciate until years later. Judge Morrison was asking, if you really had the money to help Jennifer, why didn't you just help her without involving your other daughter? And the answer, the real answer, the one my father couldn't articulate, was because they didn't actually have the money. They had put $50,000 down because that was all they could afford to give. They had taken on a mortgage because that's what they could carry free, and they had involved me because they couldn't carry it alone. In other words, they were asking me to rescue them while pretending they were helping Jennifer. This was the thing that really shocked me when I finally understood it fully. My parents weren't just enabling Jennifer's irresponsibility. They were using Jennifer's irresponsibility to get me to bail them out financially. They had trapped themselves in a mortgage they couldn't afford and were using Jennifer, and guilt, and obligation, and family loyalty to get me to rescue them. And when that didn't work, they sued. I shared this realization with David one afternoon, about 5 years after the trial. Do you understand what you just figured out? He asked. What? I replied. You figured out that this was never about Jennifer, he said. This was about your parents' financial insecurity and their need to feel like they were good parents. Jennifer was just the vehicle for that, and you were the mark. That's a harsh way to put it, I said. But is it wrong? David asked gently. I thought about it, and I couldn't say it was wrong. No, I admitted. It's not wrong. Then that's what you need to understand, David said. Not to be angry at them. I think you've moved past anger, which is good. But to fully grasp that this was never your fault. This was never your responsibility to fix. This was your parents' problem, and they tried to make it yours. And you said no. And that was the right thing to do. The strange thing about finally understanding the full scope of what happened is that it actually brought me peace. As long as I thought my parents had been trying to help Jennifer, as long as I thought their motives were pure, even if their methods were misguided, I carried some guilt. I thought maybe I was being too hard on them, maybe I was judging them too harshly. But once I understood that they were actually trying to use me to solve their own financial problems, that guilt evaporated. They had tried to manipulate me, and when manipulation didn't work, they sued me, and I had stood firm, and I had won. That was the real victory, not the court ruling itself, but the fact that I had recognized the manipulation and refused to participate in it, even in the face of enormous pressure and emotional pain. Judge Morrison's question, that single question, became my touchstone. Whenever I would start to doubt my decision, whenever my mother would call and cry about how much the family missed me, whenever I would feel that old guilt trying to creep back in, I would think about that question. If you had a $50,000 to put down on a house for your daughter, why didn't you simply gift her the entire house? Because they couldn't. Because they didn't have the money. Because they were financially insecure. Because they were trying to use me to solve that insecurity. And knowing that, really knowing it, understanding it fully, meant I could never go back to the person I'd been before. I saw Judge Morrison one more time, about 10 years after the trial. I was shopping at the grocery store, and he was there picking up milk and bread. We recognized each other immediately. We went out for coffee, and I told him what his question had meant to me. I told him how I'd spent 10 years unpacking it, understanding it, letting it guide my life. I'm glad, he said simply. Because that's all that question was really asking. It was asking your father to be honest about what was actually happening. And when he couldn't, when he just sat there in silence, unable to answer, that silence said everything. I never did understand, I said. Even after all these years, even after my mother apologized, I don't think he ever really understood what he did. Some people don't, Judge Morrison said. Some people go through their whole lives unable to see their own role in the dynamics that harm the people around them. Your father was one of those people. But you're not. You can see it. You can name it. You can change it, and you have. He put his hand over mine. That's what matters, Margaret. Not whether your father ever understands, but that you understand, that you know the truth, that you freed yourself from the role you were assigned. That's everything. The reason I tell this story now, the reason I'm sharing it publicly, allowing it to be recorded and distributed, and listened to by people I don't know, is because I want other people to hear Judge Morrison's question and understand what it means. If you are the responsible one in your family, if you are the one who is always there, always taking care of things, always picking up the pieces. If you are the one who has sacrificed your own needs for the sake of family harmony and family obligation, I want you to hear this: you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to protect your own future. You are allowed to refuse to participate in a dynamic that's destroying you. And when you do say no, when you do set that boundary, when you do refuse to be the rescuer anymore, the people who benefit from your rescue will not like it. They will call you selfish. They will say you've changed. They will try to manipulate you, guilt you, pressure you back into your old role, and some of them might even sue you. But here's what I want you to know: if you stand firm, if you don't back down, if you refuse to let their emotional manipulation override your own judgment, you will win. Maybe not in the way you expect. Maybe not immediately. But you will win. Because the greatest victory isn't having the court rule in your favor, though that's nice. The greatest victory is knowing deep in your bones that you were right, that you stood up for yourself, that you refused to sacrifice your future for someone else's present. That's the victory that changes your life. I'm 72 years old as I'm telling you this story. 72 years old. And I've been retired for 7 years. I live in the same modest home I've owned for 30 years. I have enough money in my retirement accounts to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I have good friends, a therapist I trust, and a quiet life that brings me peace. I don't have my parents. My father passed away 12 years ago. My mother passed away 9 years ago. I grieved both of them, even after everything that happened, and I'm at peace with that grief now. I don't regret the lawsuit. I don't regret saying no to the mortgage. But I do regret that we never found a way to truly repair our relationship, that they never fully understood why I did what I did. But I've made peace with that too. What I do have is Jennifer. My sister and I talk once a week. We see each other for lunch about once a month. She's in a much better place now, sober, stable, working steadily, rebuilding relationships with her own children. She's still not perfect. She still struggles with money sometimes. But she's learning to stand on her own 2 feet, and I'm proud of her for that. A few years ago, she said something to me that I'll never forget. We were sitting in a cafe having coffee, and she said, "Maggie, I need you to know something. I'm grateful that you said no to the mortgage." I know that sounds crazy, but I'm grateful. Because if you'd signed those papers, I would have never learned to take care of myself. I would have kept leaning on everyone around me until I had nothing left. You saying no was the most loving thing you could have done for me. I cried when she said that. Not because I was sad, but because finally, someone in my family understood. People ask me sometimes if I have any regrets. Do I wish I'd handled things differently? Do I wish I'd agreed to co-sign the mortgage? Do I wish I'd been more accommodating, more willing to compromise, more flexible? The answer is no. I don't have any regrets about my decision. I have regrets about the pain it caused, about the family rift, about the years of tension and distance. But I don't regret the decision itself. Here's why: because I did the right thing. And doing the right thing is almost always hard. Doing the right thing usually comes at a cost, but that doesn't make it wrong. I could have co-signed that mortgage. I could have put my retirement at risk. I could have enabled Jennifer's irresponsibility and my parents' dysfunctional patterns, and my family would have been happy with me, at least temporarily. But I would have been sacrificing my own security for that happiness, and I'd already spent my entire life doing that. I wasn't going to do it anymore. The lawsuit changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more confident now. I'm more willing to say no without guilt. I'm more able to set boundaries and enforce them. I'm less willing to sacrifice my own well-being for other people's comfort. Some people might say that makes me harder. Some people might say I've become less generous, less loving, less willing to help. But those people would be wrong. I'm still generous. I still help people. I still show up for the people I love. But I do it from a place of choice, not obligation. And that makes all the difference. David died 3 years ago. Heart attack. He was 78. I was at his bedside when he passed, and his last words to me were, "You're going to be okay, Maggie. You've got this." He was right. I am okay. I've got this. I think about him often. I think about how he stood by me through all of that chaos, how he helped me see the truth, how he supported me in standing firm even when it was incredibly hard. I think about how rare that kind of friendship is, and how grateful I am that I had it. I miss him every day. A few months ago, a woman approached me at the grocery store. She recognized me from a true crime podcast that had featured my story. She told me that hearing about what I did, hearing about me saying no to my family, about standing firm in the face of pressure, about going to court and winning, had changed her life. I was in a similar situation, she told me. My family was pressuring me to co-sign a loan. I felt guilty saying no. But then I heard your story and I realized I didn't have to participate in their dysfunction. I said no. And it was hard, but I said no. And thank you for that. Thank you for showing me that it was possible. I cried in the middle of the grocery store. I actually stood there in the produce section and cried, because finally, something good had come out of all that pain. Finally, my suffering had meaning beyond just my own healing. It had helped someone else. That's when I decided to tell this story publicly. That's when I decided to allow it to be recorded and shared and listened to by people I don't know. Because maybe there's someone listening right now who is in the same position I was in. Maybe there's someone who feels the weight of family obligation pressing down on them, who feels guilty for wanting to protect their own future, who has been told that saying no is selfish or unloving or a betrayal of family loyalty. And I want you to know you are not alone. And you are allowed to say no. Here's what I know now that I didn't know at 60, 8 years old: family is important. But it's not more important than your own well-being. Love is important. But it's not the same as allowing yourself to be used or manipulated or exploited. Loyalty is important. But it's not a one-way street where you sacrifice everything and others sacrifice nothing. I spent 8 years believing that family obligation was absolute, that love meant setting aside your own needs, that being the responsible one was my purpose and my identity. I don't believe that anymore. I believe that family is a choice. I believe that love is reciprocal. I believe that being responsible means being responsible to yourself first and foremost. And I believe that saying no to the people you love, when saying no is what you need to do, is one of the most important acts of self-care you can perform. The lawsuit taught me something else too. It taught me that sometimes justice isn't about being right. It's about having someone in a position of authority acknowledge that you are right. Judge Morrison didn't just rule in my favor. He asked questions that exposed the truth of the situation. He held my family accountable. He validated my decision publicly, in front of my family, in a space where they couldn't deny or minimize or rationalize it. That validation was powerful. It mattered. And if you're in a situation where you need that validation, where you need someone to tell you that your boundaries are reasonable, that your decision is justified, that you're not being selfish or cruel or unloving, I want to give you that validation right now. You are not selfish for protecting your financial security. You are not cruel for setting boundaries with your family. You are not unloving for refusing to participate in dynamics that harm you. You are being wise. You are being mature. You are being healthy. And you deserve support in doing that. I've thought about what I would say to my parents if I could talk to them now. I've imagined conversations where I could explain to them why I did what I did, where I could help them understand that my refusal to co-sign the mortgage wasn't a rejection of them or a failure of love. But I think even if I had the chance to have that conversation, it wouldn't change anything. Some people aren't able to hear that message. Some people go through their entire lives without understanding how their behavior affects the people around them. Some people die without ever fully grasping the impact they've had. And I've made peace with that. I don't need my parents to understand anymore. I understand, and that's enough. If you're listening to this, and you're thinking about a situation in your own life where you need to say no to someone you love, I want to leave you with this. The short-term pain of setting a boundary is nothing compared to the long-term pain of not setting one. It might feel like rejection right now. It might feel like betrayal. Your family might tell you that you're being selfish or cruel or cold-hearted. They might cry. They might get angry. They might try to manipulate you or guilt you or pressure you into changing your mind. Let them feel what they feel. You are not responsible for managing their emotions. You are only responsible for managing your own. And years from now, when you look back on this moment, when you look back and see that you stood firm, that you didn't sacrifice your own future for someone else's present, that you loved yourself enough to say no, you will be so grateful that you did. I promise you that. I think about that moment in the courtroom often. I think about the silence after Judge Morrison asked my father that question. I think about the way my father couldn't answer. I think about the way the truth hung in the air, undeniable and exposed. And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't stood firm, if I'd signed those papers, if I'd sacrificed my own security for my family's comfort. I would have co-signed the mortgage. Jennifer would have struggled to make payments. My parents would have had to bail her out again. The debt would have become my debt. My credit would have been damaged. My retirement would have been at risk. And the whole cycle would have continued. And the lesson that Jennifer needed to learn, that she needed to take responsibility for her own life, would have never been learned. And the lesson I needed to learn, that I was allowed to say no, that my needs mattered, that my future was worth protecting, would have never been learned. And Judge Morrison's question, that beautiful, powerful, truth-telling question, would never have been asked. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the pain, because it led to growth. I'm grateful for the lawsuit, because it forced things into the open. I'm grateful for my family's rejection, because it freed me from the obligation to maintain a relationship that was harming me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to tell this story now, to share it with people I don't know, in hopes that it might help someone else find the courage to do what I did, to say no, to stand firm, to protect their own future, to love themselves enough to set boundaries. This is where my story ends, but it's not where your story ends. If you're listening to this, and you're struggling with similar issues, with similar family dynamics, with similar guilt and obligation and pressure, your story is just beginning. Your story is the one where you stand up, where you say no, where you refuse to participate in dysfunction, where you protect your own future, where you love yourself as much as you love your family. Your story is the one where you win. And I can't wait to see how it unfolds. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with me in this story. Thank you for allowing me to share what happened, why it happened, and what it taught me. If you feel moved by this story, if it touched your heart, if it changed how you see family obligation, if it gave you courage to set your own boundaries, please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me where you're from, what time it is where you are, and whether this story resonated with you. Because stories have power. Our stories have power, and when we share them, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, when we tell the truth about what happened and why it mattered, we help other people find their own truth. And that's everything. Thank you. I wish you peace, courage, and the wisdom to know the difference between love that builds you up and obligation that tears you down. You deserve both. You deserve all of it. Take care of yourself.